The title of this talk kind of popped into my head this morning without exactly telling me where to go with it. But basically, it's, so what is a spiritual life? And I suspect everybody in this room has an answer for that. But I would assume that it's a relatively abstract answer. I think a lot of people think of a spiritual life as something other than their daily life. And that's kind of what distinguishes it. A spiritual life somehow is connected with spirit, as opposed to body. And if I asked you to define spirit, I think you would have a hard time. Some people might say it's their soul. And then that gets even more complicated. Because there are these invisible forces that somehow we think are us, perhaps more essentially us, than this. But if that's true, what is it? What is this spiritual thing that you are? And how do you engage it? Well, if you try to define a spiritual person, often you'll say it's somebody who's holy, meaning they're in touch with God, or they are in touch with something greater than themselves, that they are good people, that they are compassionate people, that they care about others more than they care about their own individual, unique persona. And in a way you're describing an affect rather than the thing itself. Because I think a lot of what you call spiritual people are very nice people, very kind, very considerate, loving, people you might want to model yourself after. You certainly look at the great models of that, Mother Teresa. You can pick your own name, the Dalai Lama. People like, oh yes, they're spiritual. And we also think of spiritual as somehow higher, a higher quality of person than us. So therefore there's something to aspire to, that ultimately as you become more spiritual, you become less, let's say, egoistic. You're less self-serving in a sense of your own personal pleasures, and you're more reaching for something global, something bigger. And all of that is, in a way, true. But there's a missing component. And the missing component is this idea that spiritual is somehow other than what you are right now, than this. That the spiritual life is something that transcends normal human existence. And one of the first things Rudy taught me, and I thought it was a really important teaching, which now I find more important, was he said spiritual life starts with making your bed in the morning. And I don't think a lot of people want to hear that. I think people want to hear spiritual life means you don't have to make your bed in the morning. That you don't have to worry about the world. You don't have to worry about yourself in day-to-day existence. You just have to worry about you and whatever spirit is, this higher calling, something that separates you from life, that separates you from the hoi polloi, the mundane existence. But Rudy was basically saying, no, no, no. Spiritual life is making your bed in the morning. And why do you make your bed in the morning? You could just as easily not make it. You can leave the sheets, sort of where they're going to be when you get back in bed at night. Why bother? Why clean up your life when in fact it's only going to get messy again? Well, it's an important question. Why bother do anything? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to have a life? What is your responsibility to day living? Well, your responsibility is your spiritual life. Your responsibility, how you respond to the demands of a material, worldly, mundane existence, is you. It's the definition of you. Your response will be, in Rudy's terms, either to be caught in it, or in a sense to be above it. Now let me explain that a little bit. When you're caught in it, you struggle with your life. To be caught in life is to be in the dynamic of yin-yang, which means opposites in battle or in opposition to each other. Opposites are opposition. But to be above it, opposites are in harmony. And how do you allow for your life to be harmonious rather than tension-filled? That is the beginning of spiritual practice. Becoming conscious of what's in front of you. What's in front of you, as I've said many times in this class, what's in front of you is yours. You may not want it to be there, but it's yours. A lot of demand, a big job, a child to rear, a relationship to heal. All of that's your job. Everything that's in front of you is yours, including the things that aren't in front of you, like not having a job, not having money, not having happiness. All of that is your situation. How you respond to that, your level of responsibility, is defining your nature. Trying to become a whole person in relationship to your life is what Rudy called the beginning of a spiritual life. He said that you have all of your chakras open, all of these energy centers within you working, not so that you're spiritual, so that you can become aware of that which is spiritual. So let's talk for a second about what it means to be spiritual. Spirituality is a awareness. It's a connectivity. Something inside you begins to sense that it's not all about you. That something bigger is taking place, and that you are part of it. In fact, in some larger sense, you are one with it. But how do you know that? How do you get to that place? Usually, in the day-to-day struggle of life, in the incompletion of our lives, in the lack of satisfaction, in the pursuit of pleasure, in the avoidance of pain, we are completely unaware of this connectivity, this openness, this lighter-than-air awareness of something bigger than us. It just doesn't come into the picture. It doesn't come into the picture because we are so deeply, deeply caught up in the struggle, so unaware of the harmonious. And then usually something happens in a person's life that shakes that up. It can be a loss of somebody. It can be what's called a rude awakening. Suddenly you're going, oh, I've been misled for this entire lifetime. I've missed the point. Something isn't right. You can not get a job, for example, or you can have a huge success and discover that it didn't bring you anything. There are all of these things that shock you into there's got to be something else. And sometimes it actually shocks you into there is something else. And what you find is a immediate awareness of a global consciousness. For one instant, you go, this is big. Something vast is happening here. Sometimes you get it for a blip of a second, sometimes you get it for a timeless moment. Timeless meaning time stops. There is no time, and you just, oh. That, for many people, is the beginning of a spiritual existence, because you become aware of awareness itself. You become aware of presence. You become aware of something permeating the daily life. It's always been there, it's always part of you, but you become aware of it. And then it disappears. It lasts that long, and then it's gone. But your whole life changes, because you're aware that there's more. There's something larger within this. And that glimpse is enough to set you on a path. And that path is to recapture that. How do I get back to that? And so one of the paths that becomes available to people is this thing called meditation. And what is meditation other than sitting still? And what's the value of sitting still other than that it begins to show you within the stillness the very thing that you had at that one moment that talked to you about the vastness of being. In the stillness of sitting, you start to remember, rediscover, reawaken this. The amazing thing about sitting still is that you're not doing anything. The amazing thing is, in a certain sense, you're not even there. All that is happening is what is. So in meditation, you begin to have a place to go to recall or recollect oneness, higher consciousness, spiritual awareness. The fact that there is something greater than you. And it becomes such a delicious awareness that you want to come back to it as regularly as you can. And so a lot of people begin to devote their lives to this discovery of this thing, the discovery of the spiritual in their life. They devote their lives to it, and they become seekers of this spiritual state. You go to retreats for 10 days to sit still, thinking if I just sit for 10 days, I'll have 10 days of stillness. And of course, usually what you discover in those 10 days, at least what I discovered, is the unbelievable noise and discomfort of sitting still. It's pretty awful, really. Unless you go into a kind of trance. You can go into trance states. Trance states are bodiless states, mindless states. It's just, and they're kind of pleasurable. They're kind of an absence of you, but they're not necessarily a presence. Becoming a seeker is a wonderful thing, but it has in it a very important idea, and that is that you find what you're looking for. And instead what happens is you begin to find professional spiritual seekers. Their whole life is seeking. They don't want to find anything because they have become defined by the act of seeking. I am a seeker. They become prideful in that. I am a holy person. I am a spiritual person. I am a good and loving person, which may be true. But it's a state of blindness, really, because spiritual awakening has within it an extraordinarily unexpected component. And that component, when it fully expresses itself, is that there's no you to have any of this. The end goal of spiritual awakening is that there is no you to awaken. The not you, the obliteration of the you, is liberation itself. What you become is nothing. And that nothingness is the spiritual truth that you have been tapping into as experiential truth all during your manifested state. All the time you were a person seeking and having these meditative experiences of stillness, of the absolute, of oneness. They were experiences you were having. You owned them. You defined yourself by them. You wanted them. And you also wanted the advantage that they offered you. The advantage of happiness. The advantage of an open heart. The advantage of perhaps a greater creative flow that made you a better artist or communicator. There's so many advantages to spiritual connectivity that if you want that in your life, you can become a spiritually infected or affected being. But it doesn't mean you're an awakened being. It just means you have taken from the spiritual realm and used it to become more ego-minded, if you will. The biggest example of that would be to become a shaman. A shaman is someone who awakens to the spiritual totality and then uses it for the world's good or for his or her own good. Using it for the world's good is terrific. You can make it rain, you can heal people, you can predict the future, you can do all these amazing things. And you become, in a sense, honored for that. You can write books, you can make a lot of money, you can do all sorts of things, but it's a problem in that, in the end, there's still you and it. There's still this separation. And the true spiritual awakening still requires the obliteration of, the letting go of, the washing away of you. And that is the end goal of your practice. The finality of spiritual growth is the awakening to the fact that there was no one to grow. That you are now, and as always have been, nothing. Emptiness itself. That is who you are. In being nothing, you are truly you. Having a spiritual life means you are in pursuit of nothing. That you are practicing the stillness that ultimately you come to know as your true and ultimate state. That's the glory of spiritual awakening. That being on the path is leading you to this place. But when you get to that place, you realize that you've never not been there. The entire search is to arrive where you are now. And you know, in my case, it took 45 years to go from here to here. No distance covered. No distance. It was just stuff falling away. Falling away, falling away, falling away. And what happened when I sat for 45 years in meditation is I was practicing letting stuff go. letting it go, letting it go, letting it go, letting it go. And finally, the last piece was let go. Done. Finished. And that's it. Now, I'm still here. I'm still talking to you. It's clearly a person, a body, form, saying pretty much the same things I was saying to you before this happened. But the difference is you just stay there. You don't stay there, you are there. You are it. And you know it. You can get confused at times and lost and return to ego mind occasionally. Happens. Stuff comes up. The world's demanding of you. You know, there's stuff you need to do, function. It happens. But it doesn't matter that it happens, because you know who you are. You know what you are. True spiritual awakening is an absolute knowledge of something, of truth, of yourself. The spiritual path that each of you are on leads to this. But it also can lead to just the opposite. Probably the worst thing that can happen is you're becoming a spiritual person, a spiritual ego, an identity that has spirituality as its form. Because that's a huge trap. That's about as big a trap as you can get into. I am, egoistically, the vastness of being. Truly, that I am, that ownership element, cannot be it. It's part of it, but it's only when it goes away, when it's finished, that you can go, I am that. That's the journey. The journey of however many years or lifetimes all ends up at this one point. So the goal or the purpose of somebody sitting here and talking about it, bringing you to a class, bringing you to a place where this is being spoken about, is just to remind you of what you're doing, what you're aiming at, and also to promise you that there's an end to it, that there is an arrival, that there is a point where you have actually done it, where it has happened. Will this class make it happen? No, I don't think so. I don't think there's any way that a teacher can go to somebody and necessarily go, I'm awakening you. I mean, I'm sure it happens, but the teacher personally isn't doing it. The self can be aware of its own ripeness and see it in its expression around you. It can help the fruit off the tree. But mostly, you're doing the ripening, you're doing the work, you're letting stuff fall away so that you can become full of the juice and the nutrition and the joy and the fullness of being. That fullness falls off the tree. That fullness recognizes itself. That fullness is who you are. And the more you let go of your limited idea of who you are, the more that fullness takes place until there's nothing but that. So, what is a spiritual life? It's everyday life. It's the day-to-day movement through the world. And how do you grow through that? How do you evolve through that? By not fighting it. By not being angry at it. By not thinking somehow or another it's wrong, it's not working. It's working. It's working because you're in it, and it's happening, and it's in front of you. And you can take whatever is in front of you, and you can do one of two things. You can reject it, or you can open to it. You can take it in and go, this too is mine. This too is my work. This is real. This is what I have to interact with, and I can either open to it or push it away. But if you push it away, let me guarantee you, it will come back. Until you open to, love, embrace, and accept what is, it keeps returning with a vengeance. And finally you just stop fighting it and you just go, yes, yes. And that's it. Somewhere in that yes, the you that was fighting is gone. Done. Spiritual life is a conscious life. It's a life of conscious response to the next moment, or if you want to put it better, to this moment. Conscious response to this moment, over and over and over and over. In time, it provokes awareness of itself. And that's all there is. Any questions?
With this obliteration, or after the obliteration, is there, I assume there's an observer, but I guess there's no identification or ego identification of the observer?
That's one way to put it. There's still this, these eyes, this person, this history. History doesn't mean much really at this point, but it's there. What you sense, what is sensed, is that there is seeing. But it's not focused through the Bruce ego. It's just seeing. And there's elements of Bruce in that. Clearly, these two eyes are in this particular head for the moment. And there's a sense of familiarity that's incredibly comfortable. What's so fascinating about it is that the seeing which is occurring is deeply, warmly, lovingly familiar. The ego mind as it was is absolutely a part of the whole. Last week I described it as a process not of obliteration but of reabsorption. The ego, separate self of Bruce, has been reabsorbed into the totality of being. Bruce hasn't gone away. Bruce is just one with all there is. And so, for the moment, this seeing is... There's Bruce in it, but it's bigger.
It's the ancient you.
It's the ancient you. Yeah, thank you. It's the ancient all. It's the infinite absolute. Seeing at this moment through these eyes. And that's what you sense. And there's a wonder and an awe and an amazement that happens pretty regularly now that just comes from seeing through those eyes, breathing through this system, hearing differently. And it's very beautiful. It's not, people are so afraid of obliteration or absorption, and I keep trying to explain, it's the thing you want most. It's not the worst thing that can happen to you, it's the best thing that can happen to you. Awakening is a gift, not an end to anything, it's a completion. And people have this mindset, which really is the ego in terror of losing its running the show. The ego doesn't want that, so it creates unbelievable horror trajectories for itself. It projects all this awful stuff. And I'm in touch with people right now who are going through this, who are in this awakening process, what I call the rude awakening process. The rude awakening is the ego fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And it's saying, this horrible thing will happen, and that horrible thing will happen, and you don't want to let go, and it's going to be awful, awful. It's ridiculous. The ego is just out of control. But finally something snaps. The soul recognizes this is ridiculous, and it just, enough. And the ego just, you can call it obliteration or absorption, but it's done. It's just done. It's still there in little ways. It still creeps up every so often. It's still, it likes certain things and not other things. It's not going to change that. There's certain things, it may change. Certain things that were habitual may no longer be habitual, but a lot of its predisposition will be there. So what? That's okay. Does that make sense? Anybody else? Thank you. That was exactly the right word. The ancient self, the true self, the infinite, endless self is there. That's all it is. That's all there is anyway, ever. It's just we live totally in ignorance of that. Day-to-day ignorance of the infinite self that we are. You don't... Awakening isn't to something different. It's to what has always been. That's the extraordinary thing about awakening. It's always been. And you're that even as we speak. And not knowing it is absurd. But we live in absurdity. We just do. Michael?
You were just talking about the people who are fighting the awakening because they're afraid. Could you talk a little bit more about that, the process, or what happens on the other side?
For some people I've been in touch with recently, they're starting to have this experience of non-duality. They're experiencing that they're not in their body, that they're not who they think they are. They're starting to awaken to this larger truth. And the ego tells them these horrible things about them. It says, you're going to go crazy, you're losing your mind, this isn't true, you're not this larger thing, this is your ego projection of godliness, or it totally co-opts in the kind of demonic, devilish way everything that's truly trying to occur for you. Some people call it dark night of the soul, when you doubt everything that's going on, or when you completely lose this sense of awakening, which is also something that happens to people when it's starting to take place. You have this huge awareness of oneness, and then it completely goes away, and you feel like you've been betrayed by it. And the ego mind comes in and just takes full advantage of this experience, and it just says, see, it wasn't real, and it's not real, and you're an egomaniacal guy. It does all these things to make you really uncomfortable, to make you really fearsome, and it projects death. It projects this finality of death, of the abyss, of the endless darkness. All of these horrible things that come up, and you go, oh, I don't want to go there. Why would you want to go there? Until you realize it's just the ego projecting that. And you finally let go of that, and you realize, this is why they call it the deathless state, that when you get reabsorbed into the self, it's an infinite truth. It's not going anywhere. The separate entity, this Bruce thing, definitely will have limitation and limited duration. It's going to go away, but I'm no longer bound by Bruce. Whatever it is, it will have the ultimate reabsorption when there's no more body, and then it will be what it continues to be. And there's no fear of that because there's no Bruce there to fear it. There's a biology that's there to fear it. Blanche almost, I thought, was going to get hit by a car yesterday, and the body kind of, went into like, oh my God, that kind of thing does occur. But it's just body. The body does those things. There's no reason, why would it not do those things? And I keep saying, Christ on the cross was not happy. The body hurt. It goes through pain. Nisargadatta, in his last days on the planet, was suffering from cancer, and it was painful. So that doesn't disappear. What is. But ultimately, you are not that. And the final element of awakening, I gather, is the final loss of this. But it's much easier when there's nobody trying desperately to hold on.
Okay. And what about how they're dealing with the people around them who might not want them to go through this, or if that's happening?
That for some people it's a problem. People who have unexpected awakening, where they haven't been living a quote-unquote spiritual life, and somebody around them awakens, that person may get really refocused in some ways in terms of what's important in their life and what they're paying attention to, and that can be disturbing to the people around them, especially if they don't have their own spiritual connection. So I've heard stories of marriages that kind of fall apart where somebody awakens to this and the other person's in that mode and they can't connect. But in the best of cases, and I've described this in my situation with Blanche, who's been practicing with me all these years, when the awakening happens, it doesn't change all that much. Although I said to Blanche, and I've repeated this before, that I love her more than Bruce ever did. And that can be the reality. That this being has no ego minds. If you love me, I'll love you, or you give me and I'll be there for you. None of that's there. It just loves. It just gives. Nobody's going to want to walk away from that. Really. So I have friends who have awakened and who have family, and everyone, literally everyone around them has no idea what they're talking about anymore. And so they don't talk about it with them. Most of the people, other than you guys here, I can't talk about this. I can't go out on the street and talk about this. Who would understand a word of what I'm saying? Nobody. Even my own kids. People are really close to me. I told them this happened, but okay, great, Dad. They don't want to know from it. I get it. I totally get it. Why should I burden them with it? But I'll burden you with it because you've come here, you've driven here some distance to hear me talk about it. So. But mostly it doesn't change anything. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And also, truly, very few people have a language for this experience, so they can't talk about it. There's nothing to say. What can they say? This is truly it. Yeah? I am one with all that is. Really? There's nothing to say. So you shut up. You shut up and go about your business. The best example of it ever that I've seen is in the movie Resurrection. Ellen Burstyn, who's a healer, who's everybody's honoring her and wanting her to be this healer and to go out and make millions of dollars and heal everyone in the world, leaves it all behind and ends up, running a gas station somewhere in the border at California, Mexico, I think, I don't know, somewhere. And she just runs the gas station. And at some point, this kind of a camper pulls up with a family and all the people run to go to the bathroom, and some little boy walks out, he's got cancer. And he's just standing there outside of the camper, and she walks over to him, and she just hugs him. And then he gets back on the camper, the family all comes back, they all get back in the camper, and they drive away. No one knows what she just did. Nobody. No one. She just healed this kid. No one will ever say thank you. No one will ever acknowledge her personal involvement, and she doesn't care because she isn't an ego personality. She is the self of the self. She loved, healed, and let it move on. Buddha, at the end of his life, at least the story of Siddhartha, was just a ferryman who ferried people across the river from one side to the other. And you can just imagine what he did. He connected with whoever was on that boat going back and forth. He had his moment with them. And I have discovered in the last 2 months, the people who arrive in my life at this moment have all arrived for a reason. It's really interesting. You really feel it. And you feel the obligation and the opportunity to share with them. Sometimes it's verbal, sometimes it's just a hug. Doesn't matter. The self is expressing itself to itself. And some of it recognizes it, some doesn't matter. It's doing what it does. So it's a win-win, positive situation. You've moved beyond duality. It's yin-yang operating as a whole. It's oneness. It's absolute. It's complete. It's whole. Okay. Anybody else?
Actually, Bruce, many people would love to hear you talk. Put your stuff on YouTube.
Well, this is too long for YouTube, but we are. That's why I'm doing
Seriously?
this. No, we're now putting this out there. But I also last week or so shared with everybody a site that has lots of people talking like this. And what I wanted people to understand is I'm not the only voice of this. There are multiple voices, and we should all be taught. Anyone who wants to talk about this, who's there, should talk about it because it's I think meaningful for people to hear. But this is not about creating Bruce as the voice. This is just another voice of the self speaking. And I really want that understood because it should never become about the teacher. It's about the teaching. And the teaching comes through all these voices, and it comes through beautifully. So, I don't care if any of you all decide to study with another teacher. It truly doesn't matter. If find the person who really speaks to you. That's the way it should go. Find who speaks to you and let them do it. And if this speaks to you, great. But I am, as you can tell, hi everybody, I'm speaking on camera right now, and I'm doing this because it seems to be the thing to be doing right at this moment. I can't tell you why, but it's the right thing.
I know it's come home, and I've had a hard time asking this question because I feel like when you talk about that there is nothing or that you are nothing, that it starts to sound like the ego voice that's trying to beat you out of just being happy to be alive, essentially.
Well, that's not the right. Let me put it this way. The word nothing is a complicated word. Think of it as you're no thing. You're no thing. You're not a separate entity. You are the whole. You are all there is. And I mean that in the most unbelievably profound sense. You are the floor you're sitting on, the wall to your left, the painting that's hanging next to you. When you sit in a chair, you are that unbelievable support. You are the earth that supports your feet when you walk on it. You are the blades of grass that come up to tickle your toes. You are the whole thing. When you become no thing, you become everything. The ego isn't the thing that lets you know joy. Joy is there, and the ego taps into it on occasion. But joy is, and you become the very thing that you're looking for. You always have been the very thing you're looking for. So this ego that wants to own that actually gets in the way of it. It tries to hold on to this thing in a way that is permanently its own, but that's impossible because it's endlessly changing. It's always changing. So anytime you try to hold on to, I always say, try to hold on to a rainbow. The minute you do that, you've lost the whole experience of the rainbow, because what makes the rainbow exquisite is that it's for a very limited duration. And the true appreciation of it can't be the taking of the picture and staring at it. The real appreciation is the fact that it is appearing and disappearing as you watch it. So, okay, long talk. Thank you guys very much. See you next week.